This video is on the Mannerists, and we're going to begin with Titian. We did a Titian last time, and Titian I don't think is technically a Mannerist, but he's later than the High Renaissance, or he differs from the High Renaissance, and I want to show how he differs and the kind of ways in which he differs are similar to the way the Mannerists differ. Let's look back. First, so this is the Pizarro Madonna of Titian here, and look back when we had the Bellini. This is a Madonna and Child enthroned, just as the others, and with saints in architectural setting. And this one, as I had showed before when we were talking about the High Renaissance, it has those characteristics: symmetry, monumental figures. It's balanced. It has decorum, gravitas, all those things that we think of as the High Renaissance. Pretty embodied in this picture, and at the same time, it's also Venetian, so it has much more interest in service detail, prettiness, decorative qualities, shiny, sparkle, all those things, and color, and beautiful color and decorative color. When we look at Titian, he has those same features. Zoom out a little. See the whole thing. You can see his architectural setting that it was painted for, oil on canvas. It has those features, at least the Venetian type features, the color, bright colors, lots of surface detail, and an interest in materials, and the sumptuousness of paint. But it differs in it doesn't have the symmetry and the balance. It has what's called an asymmetrical balance rather than symmetrical. It's not the same left and right. We're looking at the Madonna and Child enthroned, but the throne is way off to the right. We see a corner of it in the center of the picture, and it diminishes way as you go to the left and to the right. And so this is a different view of the Madonna and Child enthroned that we've seen before at all, going all the way back to Masaccio and Giotto, and even in the Middle Ages. I mean, the Madonna and Child enthroned was a centralized picture because it's not really telling a story. Is traditionally, it doesn't tell a story. It's about Madonna and Child enthroned as like an illustration of a theological idea, showing the relationship between Madonna and Child and the joy of the Virgin. Those sort of it's not really about something actually happening. It's about ideas, and the figures are standing in for ideas, and the figures represent the saints, and it occurs in some, I don't know, heavenly realm where nothing changes. So that's the story being told, or that's the thing being depicted in a Madonna and Child enthroned, typically, or in tradition. But in this is conceived differently. It is as if there's something happening. There's action going on. There's it almost looks like they're getting ready to do a traditional Madonna and Child enthroned, but they haven't. They're just setting up, and they haven't positioned the camera right, and you just see like sort of like those pictures you see of actors on the set of a movie, but behind the scenes when they haven't set it up yet. It has that kind of feel to it. Is because it's like real people in a real space, but they're not arranged the way you think of as the compositional norm of the Renaissance, being off center, and instead of having the pyramid, the symmetrical pyramid on its base, creating the balance and the harmony, you have this diagonal from the perspective of the two columns in the background. But also these heads make a diagonal, and that the focus is over here rather than in the center, where you have Peter is in the center, but he's twisted with his body facing one way and his head facing the other, and so he's a transition from one thing to another, from this figure down here to Mary up here. So you have this movement to the upper right, and where you have this large heavy column not in the center, and another column down here is smaller because it's farther away, and you have this plunging perspective. But he's covered up most of the perspective, so these read really as big hulking shapes. And you have the clouds in the sky with putti up there, and also they're also not symmetrical. The cross is in the center, but it's askew, and you have asymmetrical balance of the two angels up there. Another diagonal right here going counter to this diagonal and almost perpendicular to it. And you have a figure of, say, St. Francis here. He's facing to the left, so we see him foreshortened, and his head is turned back in space to the Madonna, making this arrangement a more complex, I guess you could say, and differently composed than anything you've seen before. Now, one thing that is perfectly traditional is the donor down here. He's depicted almost exactly the same as the way a donor was depicted in just about any painting, kneeling down with his seen from profile face and hands there praying, being pious, showing how pious he is. He's the same shape as the donors in the Trinity fresco by Masaccio. But many of the northern artists has the same sort of thing with the figure of the patron in the bottom, sitting on its base like this. So this is very traditional, but nothing else is. I mean, the point of view of the composition, the way we're looking at the scene, the way the figures are arranged in this odd way, and here's a figure looking out at us. This figure here, picked out with the light, surrounded by darkness, is sort of a enigmatic figure looking out at you. This sort of draws you in. Now we're going to have that effect occur in the Baroque as a deliberate thing for the church after the Counter-Reformation. They wanted to have figures that sort of interact with you so that you become part of the story. You're drawn into the story by things like this, and this will be something from the future. But it's an odd thing to have now. And this oddness is a thing is going to be a theme among all the Mannerists. That is, doing things differently than they were done in the High Renaissance. Because the High Renaissance was a big deal. It was Michelangelo, it was Leonardo and Raphael, and other artists as well. But those were the main guys, and they had established this peak after a long climb up a hill, and they were on the same vector, I guess you could say, of all those artists from Giotto on, where from one artist to the next was an increase in skill and an increase in a desire to represent naturalism, and they each acquired a new thing and passed it on to the next generation, moving always in the same direction until we got to the High Renaissance, and that was about as high as you could get. You couldn't represent anything more ideal, more harmonious or whatever. I mean, they got as good as you can get. And so to follow that, like an act in vaudeville, it's hard to follow a really good act because, the audience is, anticipate something better than what had happened before. It's difficult to follow. And so you have to do something different. And that's what we have with the Mannerist artists. They will be doing different things, more so than when we get into the other ones besides Titian. But he has a lot of these characteristics: the diagonal composition, the this odd arrangement of things where it doesn't have the balance and idealness that the High Renaissance had. This is another Titian. We'll zoom out so you can see the whole composition. This is called the Venus of Urbino, and it's a Venus, mythological figure, is the kind of subject like the Birth of Venus by Botticelli. It's a similar sort of idea. We have a patron who wants to, have both, kind of a having a nude female figure in their home, very decorative and pretty, to show their friends, I suppose. But it's also an intellectual thing because Venus represents the goddess of love and relationship to marriage and all these things, and it's shown in a Venetian home with all the uh, color and beauty and patterns and sumptuous uh, uh, representation of everything. Similar to what Botticelli was doing, though is very very different from Botticelli because he's Florentine. He's very linear, rhythmic patterns over the surface, relatively flat. But this is Venetian version of the same sort of thing. So his figure is more voluptuous, has more volume. Look at the tonality is different than say the Botticelli. It looks like a heavy figure that's got a lot of weight. It's pushing down on the cushions. It's got the tonal qualities of the modeling of the figure is different. So this is a Venetian take on that. But unlike the Florentines, who are all big on the structure underneath things, where you can see the figure underneath the drapery, or you can see the bone, the skeleton, the internal structure underneath the figure. It's very clear in a Venetian, I mean in a Florentine, but in this Venetian, it's not about that. I mean, it doesn't look like she has bones at all. Look at the curve of her arm there, just the languid pose, and the legs, the ankle here, the way this knee works. Everything is so soft and flowing that it doesn't have an internal structure. It's just um, kind of rubbery arm. I don't know. It's a different take on the figure than the Florentines have. But the Venetians, they're Venetians. They have a different way of looking things, and they also are influenced by the North. But then comparing this to one of the rare nudes of the North, they have a different take as well, and they don't have this proportion of a figure. They don't have this. They don't have the same ideal. So this is in between. It's taking things from both, but also is a different look. Now, there's some neat things about this picture when you look at um, the way it's composed. There's a lot of sophistication in it. Look in the background. This is straight line down the middle. Now, this is kind of odd having the straight line down the middle, and the left side having um, a flat, very very near to the figure, dark shape, and this on the right side, a room, a space. But the way this is rendered, the space is rendered, is like it's almost as if there's a painting right next to her rather than there's an actual room behind her. It doesn't read so much as a distant space. One thing is that keeps that from happening. Or like one thing is bright red here brings bright colors come forward, especially one where you have right up close to you the same bright color. This red and this red relate to each other across the surface rather than back into space. The spatial cue of perspective grid going back into space. This that ought to, but because there's such a small amount of it, and this section of it looks more like a surface pattern than it looks like giving you the illusion. It looks like this stuff, this shape here, is right behind the dog. Like it is vertically aligned with the dog, and it's right there behind him as a surface rather than as an illusion of something farther back. And also what helps with that is having these several parallel lines to this main line on the surface, the column, the divisions of these tapestries on the wall, and the fact that the base of the tapestries don't seem to they're almost horizontal. These are so close to horizontal, these two lines, and that you don't see where they meet, that it becomes a just more horizontal and vertical lines on the surface, so that it's they relate to the horizontal and vertical of the format, so that it also becomes a flat thing. And being a flat thing, then you have the curves and the volume of the figure is contrasting against that. Also, the value is very, very dark in the background. The whites and the flesh tone of the figure is popping out from that. So there's lots of neat stuff going on as far as design in this. And because it's Venetian, the color sense, the lusciousness of paint. One thing we want to point out is the difference in the way paint in the foreground is from the background. The background paint looks thin. It's like a mixed turpentine in with the painting, and you can see with the paint, and you can see the canvas underneath, as if the ground is being seen through the thinness of the paint just in this background area. And then as you get forward, come forward with these patterns, and you see more thick paint strokes, especially like these highlights on this dress, and these other details within this figure look more painterly and more thickly painted. As you get closer to the surface, you get a lot more, even more so. Rather nice, nice picture, and you can see, well, that Titian did well. We have this one. We have the pastoral concert, a landscape version, a religious painting, and then a mythological painting here. So you have three very different things. So he was one of the biggest features, especially in Venetian part of this later Renaissance or early Mannerist period, and he dominated the century, and people coming after him look back and he influences those people. Now let's look at once we get to the Mannerist, how they sort of change the game. This is Pontormo, and this is called the deposition. We've seen a deposition before with the Van der Weyden deposition. And it has the same sort of elements with the lamenting Mary here, the expression on her face, very sad, gesturing towards her son who's being held up by figures, and there's other figures around expressing grief. But this is just so different and so weird in so many different ways. Let's look at and list them. There's space. The space is very ambiguous. He gives you so little information about where these people are. There's no cross. There's the background, the surface that they're standing on. There's a little bit here. There's a little bit here going into shadow, and then there's some sky up here. But within all this shape, figures fill all this shape, and you don't see where they are in relationship to each other very clearly, or where they are in relationship to, say, the ground. Mary here is swooning, and her legs are going this way. You don't see what's holding her up. Is she sitting on the ground, or is there some other thing she's sitting on? It doesn't give that to you. The artist has put these figures so that they're just in a clump, a vortex, I guess, of figures, and it's about them in their chaotic relationship to one another, and not about their objects in space, clear Florentine relationships that we're used to for the whole 1400s and for the High Renaissance. This throws all of that stuff away and makes a non-symmetrical composition and a composition where things are not harmonious and balanced, that they're in action, that there's agitation going on in all the expressions on faces and all the gestures, but there's so much sort of odd. Well, let's look at some more oddness things. This figure, the one holding up Christ. One thing is the pose. I mean, this is such an odd pose, especially for a figure that is the main figure of almost of the scene. It's we focus on him. He's looking out at us, and he's taking up so much space, and it's impossible not to look at this guy. But he's just an incidental character who's holding up Christ. Christ should be the main figure. He's wearing this garment. It's hard to see it as a garment because it looks like his skin, but has been painted pink. But he's wearing a skin tight garment. You can see the edge of it right here, and you can see that it stops at after his elbow. That this is his skin color. Um, that's so weird. What sort of garment would look like this? It's almost like hosiery. It's so tight against his skin, or that it's something painted on him. And that it's pink is weird. And then you got this odd green color here, and this sort of weird blue, and this extremely bright red in places. See how the red pops up here, here, and here, and then it's against this green. And look at this figure. It also has the what appears to be a painted-on garment of an odd color. I don't even know what kind of, if such a garment ever existed, they could make a fabric so sheer and so clingy that it would look like this. But this is just this new world of where things have changed from the High Renaissance, and we have odd colors, odd figures, odd gestures, odd proportions, odd spatial relationships. Look at this figure holding Christ on this side. Look at the size of the head's relationship to the size of the feet and its height. It's so oddly proportioned. I mean, one of the things about the High Renaissance was idealized proportions. There's a certain relationship. Think of the Vitruvian Man and its proportions. This is not like that. This is, once you get to the High Renaissance and you get to the peak of excellence or whatever of proportions, you go beyond that, you move into distortion. You go farther, or at least in a new direction, a different direction, and that direction is this kind of what appears seen through the eyes of the Renaissance is something very weird. One of the things that they also do is they quote images from the High Renaissance. That is, they take instances from the High Renaissance artists and put them in their own paintings. And one example is the pose of Christ here is very similar to the pose of Christ in Michelangelo's Pietà. Now we're going to talk about this later when we'll do all the sculpture together when we get to the end. I want to get all those all in one go so we can see them in relationship to one another. But this is Michelangelo's Pietà, and he's one of his early works, and the figure of Christ is ideal, the ideal version of the dead Christ. He looks perfect in every way, and just the amount of languid form, the position of arms, the head and the tilt of the head, and this knee being a little higher, and this hand here. It's just wonderful in every way. And you can imagine this is made by the best sculptor in the world, best sculptor in the world, and is very famous. And every one of the Mannerists knew this, in their studies, learning how to become painters. They knew the High Renaissance artist. So he makes Christ like that Christ, so that you recognize it as a quotation. But he changes things. The color of the loincloth here is green. Why green? That's an oddness. His facial features, they all seem to be related to one another. Sorry, the noses have this high bridge, each one of them, and it's as if the nose is a continuation of the forehead here, and it's also wide between the eyes. They all seem to have that, and it's just his particular style. He also combines that with these heavy-lidded eyes and the narrow mouth that's parted with pouty lips, all having that expression as sort of a theatrical expression. let's go back to this. Um, this is just strange in every way. It's hard to express how strange this is. Um, let's look at another. This is the next one is Parmigianino, and again, it's strange in different ways, a different kind of proportions. When we say mannerist, we don't mean a continuous style from one artist to another. I mean, this is the name given to all the different things that happened after the Renaissance, and each artist goes his own way, but they all go in a different direction from what was the Renaissance. This is Parmigianino's Madonna of the Long Neck. It is a Madonna in child, and it's been called that because her neck is long. And in fact, all of her features, every part of her figure is distorted in some way. In fact, you don't even know what part is the normal part from which everything else is distorted. If you think of it, her head is normal size, then the rest of her body is like a giantess. Um, her fingers are elongated. Her hand is very, very wide, and the hand as a whole is large in relationship to her shoulders, oddly narrow compared to her waist and the width and volume of her legs. She's so monumental and voluminous in the bottom part of her body, the lower half of her body, but it's not the kind of volume where you have uh, a large weight on a heavy base where the weight is low down so that it has a stability. It all seems to be teetering on this foot here. There's no indication of the throne she could be sitting on because the drapery sort of covers it up. So she's in a kind of almost an impossible standing position or an improbable sitting position. It's not really clear, that spatial ambiguity again, but in a different way. Also, this plunge in the depth with the figure way back here. This is St. Jerome holding a scroll. This figure is also stretched out of weird proportions. Looking out of the picture for some odd reason, there's a row of columns back here. I should mention this painting is unfinished. So this area, this color right here, is the canvas color. Everything else seems to be finished and polished and to a high degree, whereas all this is unfinished. Um, I don't. So we can't attribute that to the strangeness of Mannerism. I think he died before he finished it. But the things that are finished, this extreme foreshortening of the columns, and why have columns at all, and why have them this foreground figure and this background figure so far different from each other with no intervening space to tell you just how you get from here to there, so that it looks like a small figure, or at least a small scale figure, but one that is strangely attenuated. This where it seems to be transparent is probably a feature of the fact that it's not finished rather than a deliberate strangeness, though it's hard to tell. Um, the Infant of Christ, also in a kind of a Michelangelesque pose, is weirdly proportioned as well. The head relationship of the head to the body seems, I don't know what it's supposed to be like, but it's a very big baby, especially when you consider the size of what might be a normal size figure. This is an angel, but this angel comes in. It seems to have the high Renaissance proportion within it, but has a twist and a turn and an action to it that we don't think of as high Renaissance. It doesn't have the symmetry and the balance and harmony and stuff. It's more like very agitated. Look, this is an angel. You can tell it has a wing there, but only because this tiny bit of wing is shown and it's oddly clipped or cropped right here. Then you have these figures all bunched up without any kind of explanation. Are these angels? They don't seem to have wings. They're just crowded around faces. It just has a look of an artist expressing himself with his imagination, and not following any kind of convention that we had established with the High Renaissance. Oh, another feature is, if you remember from ancient history, that this the kind of sculpture they had in Greece after the classical period is called the Hellenistic period, and they had what's called the wet drapery, where a figure would be clothed in drapery that looks like it's wet, so that it clings to the figure in some places and not in others. So, and the kind of agitation of drapery is similar to that, but even more so. And then you've got the color difference, which is also the oddness of the manners as well. This is, one leg is blue, one leg is not, and oh, here there's another feature. Let's look at the pearls. Um, this look with all these details, all this hair, this wildness of hair, this all this curly hair with or wavy hair with highlights and shadows all in it, creating this decorative pattern and lots of super detail, is very much like the northern artist, Parmigianino's, from Parma. We also have some here, this kind of look. Um, Also part of the agitation, contrasting the agitation and chaos of this little area here. Lots of stuff going on in this small area, contrasted against the broad areas where little less is going on. Altogether a different world from what we had seen and seen established over a century or 2 centuries of of progress. But the things that happened, that made this happen, the death of Leonardo, the death of Raphael, the sack of Rome, all these things have happened, and the world is different. You can't do the High Renaissance anymore at this point. High Renaissance had to do with an idealized world that one could conceivably do then, but you couldn't do now, because at this point history has changed. Things are topsy turvy. The the Reformation has happened. It's one can't think, I imagine, of the ideal world that you could before. So artists have to express themselves in a different way. You have to have a different language. You have to have just do things differently. Let's look at a Venetian example. This is Paolo Veronese, and it's a painting that was originally called The Last Supper, though he was ordered by the Inquisition to change it. Now it's called The Christ in the House of Levi. Now let's look at it as a Last Supper first. And we think of it in relationship to Leonardo's Last Supper. The table is parallel to the picture plane, and Christ is in the center. Apart from that, there's no relationship. It is a perspective picture, but it is vastly different. It's a huge picture, 42 feet wide, and the figures are about life size, so that it's necessary, if you're going to have life-size figure in such a big picture, that so much space has to be given over to something other than the Last Supper. And being Venetian, he gives it over to lots and lots of stuff, lots of things happening, so as to create the pageantry that is valued highly in Venice, and also the bright colors, the lots and lots of activity, different textures, material textures, little stories going on, so that to create things of interest. When he was called before the Inquisition because of this picture, they wanted to, the Inquisition was something they were looking for heresies, people doing things that would disturb the the Orthodox Christian views, and they had enough of that with the Reformation, with the Protestants, and criticizing all the things about the Catholic Church, especially the way they did art, and they would belittle it in ways and do things that the Catholic Church would thought found heretical, and the Inquisition wanted to make sure that Veronese wasn't doing that here, because it has so many things that are inappropriate. And think of the decorum that's in a high Renaissance picture. This doesn't have it. This has all sorts of stuff going on that is unrelated to the Last Supper, but because the artist put it in just because he wanted to add interest. You can read about it if you look up in Wikipedia on Paolo Veronese at the bottom. Scroll down at the bottom, you'll see a transcript of the conversation, the question and answer between the Inquisitor and Paolo Veronese about the issue of this painting and the subject. And there's a kind of a threat in a situation when you're called before the Inquisition, and he winds up changing the name so as to avoid prosecution. And by changing the name Christ in the House of Levi, then you have an opportunity in that story to have all these things, or at least some of these things. But let's look at what's in it. Here's a detail of the middle of it. You can see the Venetian painting, the loose brushstroke, and the sumptuousness of color, for example, the bright reds and the pink here, and all the other stuff. Lots of materials and patterns, the perspective foreshortening that you got here makes a wonderful pattern on the floor and the edge of the tablecloth and whatever this thing is in the background. I mean, there's just all sorts of neat stuff. But you also have a dog and a cat, and the cat's playing with a cat toy, and that's the cat dog looking back at the cat. So you have this little mini story going on, and you have other things like this person is turned around looking at the servant. There's waiters bringing food, wearing their bright colored Venetian outfits. Saint Peter here is carving the lamb or something on the. I mean, things are happening, and action is happening, and it's all kind of chaotic. It's kind of like an actual bunch of people doing stuff. Let's look back at the whole. If you can see a little bit of extra things. There's a dwarf here holding a parrot. There's a action going on with this servant who's taking a step. There's behind that is this what looks like the host dressed in fancy outfit and greeting guests. There's a German here, and there's some Germans. I can't zoom in on them, but there's a couple of German soldiers, guards over here that Veronese just stuck in because he wanted to, but the Inquisitors were thinking these were very as it is inappropriate to have monkeys and dwarves and dogs and cats. It's also unimportant. It's inappropriate to have Germans and drunken guards and stuff. So the artist has created this scene. It's stabilized by these three large arches, and large, strong vertical elements, the horizontal elements going across here, big architectural framework, and big sky, big idealized city in the background, and wonderfully painted perspective to create actually to fill up space in a decorative way, interesting way to give you stuff to look at, kind of way. Neat patterns, neat directions, but the kind of things that we've thought of as that Leonardo had for the High Renaissance version of the Last Supper is they're not here. He's not trying to direct your attention to Christ with diagonals. I think this diagonal kind of goes above Christ up here. He's almost an incidental character, and the main thing, I mean, you look over the thing, in addition to this architectural framework, the main thing seems to be this guy. But he's looking out over here, and it's not easy to tell just what he's looking at on this side. You have this bigger figure than Christ, who it's not clear what he's doing. Over here in this space is a dog. So he doesn't have the same kind of I guess focus and decorum that and all the words balance, harmony, and decorum and gravitas, are things that definitely this doesn't have. I have a picture I forgot to mention. This is the context of the Pontormo, and it's inside of a little chapel that was designed by Brunelleschi. You can see the gray and white architectural features that Brunelleschi had with the arches and the capitals and little spandrel circles in the spandrels. But Pontormo did the frescoes here and the paintings and the spandrels as well as uh, the deposition over here. So I wanted to get that in as well. Here's this last artist is Tintoretto, another Venetian, and this is the painting of the Last Supper again, but this is Tintoretto's version, and it is in San Giorgio in Venice, a church designed by Palladio. It's very neoclassical. It has all the balance and harmony. It's kind of like the high Renaissance version of the architecture, but it's surrounding a Mannerist picture. And you can see how big it is, and it's very dark. It's unusually dark. There's not very many things this kind of dark until you get to the um, Baroque. In the Baroque, you have a kind of darkness that was begun by Caravaggio, where you have a very dark background, and the forms emerge from the darkness by being illuminated by a light source in the way that figures on a stage are. So it's dramatic light, and actually literally dramatic in that it's like things look like on a stage. That's in the future from here. That's from the Baroque period before, and Tintoretto is unusual in that his version of Mannerism is to have this dark background and also a plunging perspective. That is a perspective that just jumps deep into the background. He has other instances of that in his paintings. He also has, the thing that makes the the plunging perspective also gives you this strong diagonal across the picture, going from corner to corner. But it diminishes these figures, and it also makes them changes the focus of things. On a table with Christ in the middle and the disciples, as you expect from both the Leonardo and the Paolo Veronese version, putting it at a diagonal here changes the focus, so that Christ is no longer in the middle of the table, because he's in perspective with everything else. He's on the central axis of the picture, but that doesn't seem to be as strong a relationship as this big plunge into space. And also, he's so small, whereas there are figures that are larger than him that look like they are the subject of the picture. There's a figure here, a wonderfully painted, dancing-looking figure with, again, theatrical gesture and turn and twist to the body, and looking back at this figure who's on the floor on her knees, this servant woman, I guess, and she's picking up things and handing them to him to put on this sideboard with food, and the cat is looking at this basket, and this seems to be the subject of the picture because it's so prominently in the front, and your eyes go to this, whereas the business of the picture, Christ instituting the Eucharist, is much smaller in the background, and we only get to see it at all because of this bright halo that he's got. Now, it is unlike the halos we've seen before, because the way that the artists in the Renaissance decided that halos were a disc over your head like a frisbee that moved in perspective with you. We saw that first with Masaccio, and then even more so later as it became instituted as the way the way halos were supposed to behave. But this is more like the original idea of a halo as being a nimbus, a glow of light around somebody or emanating from somebody. And so Christ is here behind the table with a light behind his head, and that light is it is casting a shadow of him onto the table and these other figures as well. And look over here in this brazier hanging from the ceiling is probably an oil lamp with large flames coming out of it, and the smoke comes out and turns into figures. They are angels, and they're wonderfully painted because they are transparent. Angels, that also goes against the convention of the Renaissance established. An angel is just a human being with wings, and represented as painted as such. But here they're not. They're transparent. They're smoke. They're made of smoke. They're spirits moving around and swirling around, in which in the world of the Mannerist, that's a good thing, because they want agitation, they want chaos, they want uh, dynamism and stuff going on, and they don't want that balance and stillness and calmness and timelessness that you have with the High Renaissance. So you have all these different figures, and they're all agitated and moving all down this table line in a diagonal, and these in a parallel line. The line of the cat, the head here, this head here, this head also create a diagonal line going back. But this is a cross space, whereas this goes back in space, and it goes back and forth in a big circle, a swirl, or a vortex of movement going around this picture. So, so there you have your major features of the Mannerist art. And remember that it's not itself a style; that it is just a name, and given much later. They didn't think of themselves as Mannerist. I think it wasn't until probably the 20th century that they started calling them that, and it was just a way to group together this disparate group of artists who came after the High Renaissance. And what they have in common is that they differ from the High Renaissance, and they also differ from each other.